The square was built for ceremony, not justice. 1,000 alien eyes gleamed from the tiers of stone and steel, the imperial banners unfurling like red tongues in the bitter wind. The gallows itself was not wood but polished alloy, forged high and cruel, each noose made from braided synth fiber said to be unbreakable. It rose like a shrine to cruelty, and at its base stood 50 human women, their wrists bound, their necks bare to the air, their silence louder than any scream. The alien citizens filled the benches in rustling waves, their many species whispering in a chorus of claws, mandibles, and scale tongues. They had been promised a spectacle, the humiliation of Earth's so-called fragile mammals, a reminder that rebellion against the Empire ended in dangling bodies. Vendors shouted in sing-song tones, offering spiced fumes and glowfruit, as though this were a festival. Children pressed their translucent faces to railings, eyes wide in morbid fascination. The Empire never missed a chance to turn death into theater. At the center of the raised dais, the Imperial Executioner loomed, a hulking Brakari warrior, scales like black iron, tusks curved like butcher's hooks. He lifted his axe and howled to the crowd, who answered in a frenzy of clicking and shrieking. Behind him, magistrates in crimson robes purred speeches about law and order, about human treachery, about how mercy was wasted on a species that smiled even when cornered. The women stood in their rows, back straight. Some were settlers taken from frontier colonies, others were medics captured during raids, and a few were simply unlucky enough to have been in the wrong trade convoy. They should have trembled. Instead, they exchanged glances, brief, steadying, even faintly amused, as if at a private joke. One woman, hair tangled by the wind, leaned to whisper something to another, and both suppressed smiles. Their composure traveled through the line like an unseen current, disquieting those in the audience who expected wailing. Among them stood a man, shackled hands, ragged uniform, a faint limp from a half-healed wound. He seemed like any other prisoner, gaunt and harmless, his expression calm to the point of insolence. His name was Commander Aaron Cross, though the crowd didn't know it, nor did the magistrates. To them, he was just another mammal dragged in to be paraded before the ropes. His eyes, however, gray, steady, glinting with humor, marked him as something more dangerous than a weapon. The Brakari executioner stomped forward, voice booming through the amplifiers. Today the Empire shows its mercy. 50 human women, spared from the slaughter fields, will instead serve as warnings. Look upon them, citizens, and remember what awaits rebels. He raised his axe, pointing it at the rows of women. Behold the end of Earth's defiance. The crowd cheered. Sparks fell from the banners. A magistrate spoke next, voice dripping with contempt. Humans, do you wish to beg? Do you wish to weep for forgiveness before your betters? The silence of the women was cutting. Some of the aliens muttered. It was improper, they thought, for prey to stand so still. Finally, Commander Cross cleared his throat, voice mild and conversational. Lovely day for a hanging, isn't it? Heads turned, mandibles clicked, and Tenny twitched. The Brakari executioner snarled, tusks rattling. Silence, mammal. Cross tilted his head politely. Oh, forgive me. I was just admiring the craftsmanship. Fine rope work. Though if I may, synth fiber stretches poorly in cold air. You'll want to adjust for neck snap efficiency, or you'll just leave a lot of very irritated women dangling instead of dead. Terrible for morale. Yours, I mean. Some aliens laughed awkwardly, unsure if he was insane or mocking. The magistrates frowned, shuffling their robes. One whispered, "Why does he smile?" The executioner's tusks dripped saliva. You joke on the eve of death. Cross gave a small shrug, still polite. Oh, not a joke. Just a helpful suggestion. Wouldn't want your grand performance spoiled by technical issues. The women suppressed chuckles, shoulders shaking slightly. Their calmness was contagious, unsettling the rhythm of the crowd. Instead of terror, there was an odd tension. Curiosity, discomfort, unease. The humans looked less like victims than participants waiting for their cue. One of the younger women, freckles dusting her cheeks, spoke softly enough that only those nearest heard. Do you think they realize? Cross's smile deepened faintly. Not yet. That's the fun of it. The magistrate raised his arms. Begin the ceremony. Guards moved forward, looping nooses over necks. The rough fibers bit against skin, the squeak of strained synth echoing in the cold air. The executioner raised his axe high to signal readiness. In the audience, alien children clapped their clawed hands together, while older citizens muttered prayers of loyalty. Cross looked up at the rope above his head with a casual air, as if examining a ceiling fan. Funny thing about rope, he said conversationally. On Earth, we've got a saying. Give a man enough of it, and he'll hang himself. Always found that ironic, don't you? The Brockari growled low. Your words will not save you. Words never do, Cross admitted. Timing, though, that saves everything. The wind picked up, carrying a low vibration. Most of the crowd assumed it was the banners rattling or distant thunder. The magistrates paid no mind. The executioner lifted his axe, tusks gleaming, muscles coiled. Cross closed his eyes briefly, inhaled, and exhaled like a man centering himself before speech. He whispered almost gently, You really shouldn't have picked today. At first no one reacted, for the words were soft, carried only to the ears of those nearest. But the women heard, and in their stillness, something changed. Their shoulders straightened, eyes sharpened, jaws clenched not in fear, but in anticipation. One whispered prayer turned into a murmur, not of supplication, but of readiness. The crowd sensed it and shifted, murmurs rippling like disturbed water. The Brockari executioner hesitated, tusks grinding. Why did prey not tremble? Why did they stare back with such terrible calm? His grip on the axe tightened, uncertain. Cross opened his eyes, and the gray steel within them gleamed. He smiled again, but this time the humor was thinner, edged with something colder. His shackled hands twitched against the cuffs, not in struggle but in patience, as though waiting for a clock to strike. Above the arena, unnoticed against the gray sky, a faint rumble deepened. It might have been thunder, or it might have been something else entirely. The magistrate hissed impatiently, Executioner, do it. Show them the Empire's power. The axe rose higher, its blade catching the light. The crowd leaned forward in hunger. Commander Aaron Cross tilted his head, voice just loud enough now to carry. Show them, indeed. And with that, the air trembled once more, not from wind or banners, but from engines far above, drawing nearer. The axe hovered in the air, suspended not by hesitation, but by something stranger, an unspoken weight that pressed against the square. The Brockari executioner snarled low in his throat, sensing it yet unwilling to admit fear before the crowd. The magistrates fidgeted, their crimson robes rippling in the wind, eyes darting from the prisoners to the restless tears of alien citizens. 1,000 gazes fixed on the humans, waiting for their collapse into terror. But collapse never came. The women stood, ropes grazing their throats, their silence steady, their composure bordering on insolence. One adjusted her shoulders as though settling into a chair. Another closed her eyes, lips moving silently, not in prayer, but in the rhythm of a remembered song. A mother with hair graying at the temples stroked her bound wrists against her dress, as if tucking in a child. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. This was not the trembling obedience they had paid to see. The magistrate attempted to recover the mood, his voice booming through the amplifiers. Behold them, citizens. Even in their final breaths, these humans cling to stubborn silence. It is proof of their stupidity, their refusal to acknowledge the Empire's supremacy. A ripple of nervous laughter followed, thin and brittle. Cross smiled faintly, as though entertained by bad theater. Supremacy's a tricky thing, he said conversationally, his voice carrying across the arena. 1 minute you've got it, the next you're standing in a field wondering where the cows went. The magistrate blinked. Cows. Ah, yes, Cross said pleasantly. Domesticated earth animals. Large, tasty, occasionally prone to stampedes. Lovely creatures, though not much for empire building. Still, when they get moving, you learn to get out of the way. The Brockari executioner spat. You compare yourselves to herd animals. Cross tilted his head, eyes glinting with irony. Oh no. We compare our enemies to the ones standing in the field when the herd decides to run. The crowd murmured uneasily, humor twisted into menace, hidden within the folds of polite speech. Several spectators glanced skyward, where the faint rumble still lingered. The magistrates hissed orders to the guards to check communications, but static fuzzed across their devices. A guard barked into a transmitter only to receive garbled echoes. Cross noticed, his smile deepening. Oh dear. Trouble with the radio? Must be interference. Happens sometimes. Sunspots, solar flares, angry neighbors. Hard to keep the airwaves polite these days. One of the women chuckled softly, a sound like a bell in the cold. The aliens near the front stiffened at the sound. It was too light, too confident. An elder karate matron leaned to her companion. They do not act like condemned. They act like players in a hidden drama. The Brockari executioner roared to drown the disquiet. Begin the hanging. No more delays. He gestured to his guards, who pulled taut on the ropes. The fibers strained, creaked, bit into the women's necks. Gasps rose from the audience, eager for the moment of finality. And yet, the women did not break. One closed her eyes and whispered, "Thanksgiving dinner at my aunt's place always smelled like burnt turkey." Another replied, "Mine was worse. Uncle Frank put marshmallows on potatoes." A third snorted, "That's a crime against food." Cross chuckled, shoulders shaking. "See? We can still argue about recipes at the gallows. It's what makes us civilized." The magistrate's jaw clenched. "You mock your deaths with trivial nonsense." Trivial. Cross raised his brows innocently. "Oh no. Food is sacred. You conquer a galaxy, but get dinner wrong, and you'll never hear the end of it." Alien laughter sputtered through the crowd, uneasy, caught between amusement and dread. The magistrates exchanged frustrated whispers. The humans were not breaking. They were bending the moment into something else entirely. The illusion of control, so carefully staged, was fraying at the edges. A sudden shriek split the air, not from a human throat, but from a comm tower as sparks burst along its surface. Screens meant to display the execution flickered, distorted, then briefly flashed with alien script. System error. Gasps swept the stands. Guards scrambled to contain the failure, their movements frantic. Cross's voice threaded through the chaos, calm and maddeningly polite. "Funny thing about timing, gentlemen. You set the stage, you polish the speeches, you sharpen the axe, and then the lights go out. Always awkward for a performance." The Brockari stomped toward him, tusks bared. "Enough. I will silence you myself." He raised his axe, its blade glinting above Cross's bound head. Cross looked up mildly. "Careful now. If you swing too early, you'll spoil the ending." The axe wavered. The executioner's grip faltered, not from mercy, but from confusion, from the whisper in his mind that something larger was unfolding, something he could not see. He lowered the weapon reluctantly, waiting for a magistrate's nod. But the magistrates themselves were pale, their hands twitching, their voices unsteady. In the rows of women, a medic with sharp eyes leaned slightly toward Cross. "Are they buying it?" He answered without moving his lips, tone barely audible. "They're already sold. Just waiting for delivery." The faint rumble above deepened, vibrating through the stones beneath their feet. Several alien children clapped their hands, mistaking it for part of the spectacle. Others cowered against their parents, sensing danger. A magistrate snapped at a guard, scanned the skies. The guard fumbled with a device, which crackled uselessly before dying with a puff of smoke. Cross cleared his throat again, louder this time. "On Earth, we like to think of life as a series of shows. Birthdays, weddings, funerals. All need good timing. And the trick, really, is knowing when the curtain's about to rise." The crowd fell into hushed stillness. Even the vendors silenced their cries. The alien citizens, who moments ago had feasted on cruelty, now shifted uneasily in their seats. It was no longer a spectacle. It was a riddle. A performance in which they were no longer certain who the actors were. The Brockari growled, "You play with words. You cannot play with fate." Cross's smile thinned. "Fate's just another name for someone else's poor planning." He looked skyward deliberately. Others followed his gaze. For a heartbeat, only clouds and banners filled the horizon. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it the unmistakable roar of engines cutting through atmosphere. The crowd gasped as shadows moved behind the clouds, long and deliberate. The magistrates barked orders, voices breaking. Guards rushed, but their calm spat only static. One hurled his transmitter to the ground in frustration. Cross exhaled as if savoring a glass of wine. Showtime. The word struck like a spark in a powder room. The women straightened almost in unison, ropes taut against their throats, but eyes alight. One whispered, "They're here." Another clenched her fists until blood beaded at her skin, not from fear, but from readiness. The Brachkari lifted his axe again, roaring at the sky as if to challenge it. But even he faltered when the clouds above tore open to reveal the sharp, unmistakable outlines of descending vessels. The sound was thunder, but engineered, purposeful, echoing through every rib and bone. Panic rippled through the stands. Citizens scrambled, some crying for order, others for escape. Magistrates shrieked commands drowned by the roar. The execution ground was no longer a theater. It was the mouth of a storm. Cross's gray eyes gleamed with cold amusement. And here come the critics. The sky split open. The descending shapes were not the lumbering frigates of the Empire, but sharp-edged, angular shadows that cut through cloud and smoke with precision. Their engines howled like predators, their formation tight, purposeful. Panic exploded in the stands as alien citizens trampled one another, clawed hands tearing at robes and scales as they sought escape. The magistrates shrieked their guards, but the guards themselves faltered, staring upward in horror at what rained down upon them. The first human dropships pierced the cloud bank, dark gray hulls scarred from older battles, insignias painted in broad strokes, snarling wolves, flaming swords, a grinning skull beneath a tattered flag. The Empire had told itself humans were cornered, beaten, barely clinging to survival. Yet here they came in force, not as prey, but as hunters. The Brachkari executioner bellowed, tusks rattling, axe lifted in defiance. To arms. Protect the magistrates. His voice cracked beneath the thunder of engines. He swung his axe toward Cross as if killing one man would restore order. But Cross was no longer simply a prisoner. The faint click of hidden mechanisms sounded as the shackles fell open, sliding from his wrists like discarded jewelry. He straightened, the raggedness of his uniform suddenly regal, the calm smile turning sharper. "Finally," he said, flexing his fingers, "I was getting tired of your hospitality." The women gasped, not in fear, but in recognition. Some had guessed, but none had spoken it. The man who stood among them was no ordinary captive. He was their commander, the quiet architect of everything that now unfolded. The Brachkari swung the axe down. Cross didn't move. A single shot cracked from the rim of the arena, sharp as lightning. The executioner's head jerked sideways, tusks spraying blood. A heartbeat later, the massive body collapsed to the stage, the axe clattering harmlessly at Cross's feet. Silence followed, then a collective shriek from the crowd as realization struck. Human snipers had already marked the field. "Always hated that guy," Cross murmured, nudging the fallen weapon with his boot. He looked up at the stands, his voice carrying with almost theatrical clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Empire, tonight's program is changing. Welcome to the encore." Human Marines stormed from the descending dropships, armor gleaming with dust and soot, rifles humming with readiness. They moved with terrifying efficiency, squads peeling off with practiced precision. Where alien guards scrambled in disarray, the humans flowed like water, coordinated, relentless. Explosions cracked along the perimeter as sabotage charges detonated, shredding defensive emplacements that had already been compromised. The magistrates screamed orders, but their voices drowned beneath the rhythm of human boots striking the ground. Cross leapt from the dais, catching a Marine's rifle mid-air as it was tossed to him. He checked the chamber with muscle memory, then smiled faintly at the nearest magistrate. "You were saying something about supremacy?" The alien officials staggered backward, robes tangling around their legs. A few guards attempted to rally, firing plasma bolts into the air. But each shot drew answering fire, precise, surgical. One by one, guards dropped, crimson splattering across the stone. The citizens who had come to witness humiliation now cowered, their belief in empire shaken by the sight of humans moving like wolves freed from cages. The women on the platform yanked at their ropes, some cutting themselves free with discarded alien blades, others pulled loose by Marines who climbed the dais. They moved not as rescued victims, but as soldiers rejoining the pack. One medic seized a rifle from a fallen guard and checked the safety with steady hands. "Feels good to hold one again," she muttered. Cross nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll need it." The battle roared outward from the square. Human fire teams advanced street by street, smoke and sparks painting the sky. Alien civilians fled in droves, their shrieks echoing down narrow alleys. The Empire's soldiers tried to regroup, but their comms were jammed, their formations shattered. It wasn't just a rescue. It was an ambush disguised as martyrdom. A magistrate, trembling, hissed at Cross from behind a broken pillar. "You cannot win against the Empire. We are endless." Cross leveled his rifle, the barrel steady. His smile was polite, almost kind. "Endless? That's exhausting. You ought to take a break." He fired. The magistrate's body crumpled without ceremony. Humor laced through the chaos, unnerving the aliens more than violence. Marines shouted quips over comms as they advanced. "Package secured. Save me a seat at the barbecue." Somebody remind HQ we're charging overtime for this. Their banter was light, but their eyes cold, their movements merciless. One alien captain managed to rally a knot of soldiers at the north gate. "Hold. They are flesh and bone. Strike them down." His rally lasted 3 breaths before a Marine grenade bounced at their feet, scattering limbs and smoke. Through the haze walked a young sergeant humming a tune, stepping over corpses with casual disdain. "Flesh and bone, sure," he said. "Teeth and fire too, friend." Cross led the charge through the square, his presence magnetic. The women clustered near him, some armed, some simply running beside the Marines. He paused at the fallen executioner, picked up the tusked head, and tossed it aside. "There's your warning, Empire. Never mistake silence for surrender." The battle was not one-sided. Plasma fire ripped through the air, striking stone, shattering banners. A Marine stumbled, armor sparking, before a comrade hauled him upright. Humans bled, but they did not falter. They pressed forward with ruthless intent, not simply to escape but to occupy, to dominate. Above, the dropships continued to descend, disgorging reinforcements. And higher still, hidden behind clouds, the shadow of something larger loomed, the outline of a fleet waiting for its signal. Alien citizens pressed against the far walls, trembling as the tide turned. Many whispered legends they had dismissed as primitive myths, tales of Terran wolves, of predators who smiled with their teeth hidden until the bite came. Now they saw those legends walk in flesh and blood. A medic among the women caught Cross's sleeve. "You planned this. You let them bring us here." Cross's eyes softened briefly. "Every war needs a stage. We gave them one. Now the curtain drops." The last of the magistrates attempted escape, robes flapping as he scrambled up the dais. He raised a trembling hand. "The Empire will retaliate." "You cannot." His words cut off as a Marine's blade found his throat. Blood sprayed across the polished alloy. Cross didn't flinch. He only said, "Retaliate?" That was the idea. In the far distance, alarms wailed. Empire reinforcements would come. But for now, the square was human ground. Marines planted signal beacons, their lights pulsing. The comms interference that had crippled the aliens lifted suddenly, replaced by human-coded transmissions. A fleet commander's voice boomed through the air. "Ground secured. Phase 2 awaiting your word, sir." Cross tilted his head back, breathing deeply of the acrid smoke, the metallic tang of blood. Around him, the women stood free, some clutching weapons, others simply staring in awe at the transformation of the day. What had begun as their execution had become the Empire's humiliation. He pressed a finger to his comm. "Not yet." Let them sweat a little." The Marines laughed, short and sharp. The aliens quivered. The citizens who had once cheered for death now lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet the gaze of the predators in their midst. Cross looked to the women, his smile returning, gentler now. "You're safe. But we're not finished." They thought today would end with 50 ropes. Instead, it begins with 50 reasons. One of the younger women whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with dawning understanding. 50 reasons for what? Cross's gaze sharpened. He looked past her, past the smoke and fire, toward the unseen fleet above. For war. The square shuddered as another detonation echoed nearby. Human banners unfurled across shattered walls, their symbols stark against the ruins of Empire pride. Wolves had shed their sheepskins, and the galaxy would remember the sight. Cross adjusted the rifle in his hands, his voice once more laced with that deceptive politeness. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time we discussed consequences." Smoke hung low over the square, curling through broken banners and shattered stone, carrying with it the scent of charred alloy and burned flesh. The silence that followed the clash was not peace, but a pause, the stunned hush of an audience that had forgotten how to breathe. Alien citizens crouched where they had fallen, eyes wide, antennae trembling, afraid to move in case the wolves noticed them again. The magistrates lay scattered in crimson heaps, robes soaked black, their final authority reduced to lifeless fabric. The Brockari executioner's headless corpse sprawled across the dais, tusks glistening in the light of distant fires. Commander Aaron Cross stood at the center, rifle loose in his hands, shoulders squared but calm, as if he were merely finishing a long day's work. Around him, the 50 women gathered, ropes cut, bruises fresh, but their spines straight and their eyes alight. They had come to the gallows as condemned. They now stood as witnesses. The first Marines knelt before them, not out of formality, but out of respect. Helmets came off, faces smeared with soot and sweat, eyes soft as they looked at the women they had saved. One soldier pressed a battered canteen into a medic's hand. Another draped a thermal cloak over a colonist's shoulders. The gestures were small, almost tender, but they carried the weight of a vow. Cross looked from them to the sky. Above, the shapes of the fleet loomed larger now, breaking through clouds like steel titans. Carriers and cruisers, their hulls lit with the faint glow of weapon ports, hovered in formation. The Empire's world, once so smug in its control, was now under human shadow. A trembling alien official crawled forward, scales dulled by ash. He raised his clawed hands in supplication. "Spare us. We are civilians. We only came to watch." Cross's gaze flicked to him, cool and unreadable. "And what did you expect to watch?" "Mercy." The alien whimpered, pressing his forehead to the stones. Cross studied him a moment longer, then lowered his rifle. "Then watch something else." He gestured to the women behind him. 50 lives you tried to parade for spectacle. 50 lives that remind us why we don't forget. Watch as your empire learns consequence. A murmur rippled through the Marines. They were soldiers, but they were also witnesses now. Cross's words were not for his own people alone. They were for the galaxy, for the feeds now hijacked and streaming this moment across systems. Cameras hidden in the corners of the square, once meant to broadcast humiliation, now carried human truth. One of the younger women, voice shaking, spoke. "They were going to kill us, to make us examples." Cross turned to her, his expression softening. "They still did, just not in the way they planned." The hum of comms flared in his ear. "Commander, fleet reports orbital control. Enemy reinforcements inbound but scattered. Orders." He tilted his head slightly, considering. His eyes fell on the execution scaffold, the ropes still swaying in the acrid wind. "Broadcast wideband," he said. "Patch me through." A Marine tapped controls on his wrist unit. A tone echoed across the square, amplified far beyond the city, carried through hijacked relays into orbit and across the sector. The galaxy leaned closer, unseen but listening. Cross stepped onto the dais, standing where the executioner had stood, his figure framed by firelight. He rested the rifle across his shoulders casually, his voice steady, conversational, carrying to every corner. This morning, the Empire promised a show. They promised to teach humanity fear. 50 women were to hang here, their deaths celebrated by a crowd. He let the silence stretch. You wanted an example. You're looking at one. The camera feeds lingered on the faces of the women, lined with defiance, with exhaustion, with tears unshed. They had not broken, and now their survival was the blade driven into the Empire's pride. Cross's voice sharpened. You call us fragile, weak, yet you can't even kill us properly. You bring us to your gallows, and still we rise. You try to bury us, and we come back with shovels. He paused, letting the words settle like stones dropped into water. You thought today would be our ending. Instead, it's yours. The Marines raised their rifles in unison, barrels pointed skyward. The sound was thunderous when they fired blanks into the air, a salute that echoed across the ruined square. The alien civilians flinched, some covering their ears, others staring as though at a holy vision. Cross lowered his weapon slowly. His voice softened, almost gentle. For the 50 you tried to hang, the Empire will answer. For every rope you tied, we will cut your chains. For every spectacle you stage, we'll show you what a real performance looks like. He leaned closer to the comm pickup, his smile polite, terrible. And remember this, we are patient. We smile while you sharpen your axe. We wait while you build your gallows. But when the wolves take off their sheepskin, you never forget the teeth. The word spread across star systems in seconds, recorded, replayed, dissected. Somewhere on distant worlds, alien commanders felt unease coil in their stomachs. Somewhere in the halls of the Empire, leaders clenched their fists and tried to swallow fear. Humanity had not just survived, they had declared themselves predators. The comm clicked off. Cross exhaled, rolling his shoulders. The square was quiet again, the moment suspended. A Marine sergeant approached. Sir, perimeter's locked. What's next? Cross glanced at the women. Their faces told the story. Defiance, relief, fury, grief. He nodded once, decision firm. We leave. But not quietly. Explosions rippled across the city as human demolition teams ignited preset charges. Towers toppled, comm hubs collapsed. Supply depots blossomed into fireballs. The city that had hosted the Empire's spectacle became a graveyard of pride, smoke rising like funeral incense. Civilians wailed, but no human hand struck them. The lesson was not slaughter. It was humiliation. The women were escorted to the dropships, Marines shielding them with armored bodies. One young colonist stumbled, knees buckling. A Marine caught her, steadying her gently. Easy there. Show's over. She whispered back, trembling. No, it's just beginning. Cross walked last, his stride unhurried. At the edge of the square, he paused, looking back once more at the scaffold. The ropes still swayed, empty, their shadows long against the stones. He lifted his rifle in a final salute. For the 50, he whispered. The dropships roared to life, their engines igniting dust storms. The citizens watched as humanity rose into the sky, leaving behind fire and silence. High above, the fleet shifted, forming into attack lines. The Empire's reinforcements blinked onto scanners, warships bristling with weapons, confident in their numbers. But they entered an arena already stacked against them. Human ships moved like chess pieces, coordinated, efficient. Every Empire cruiser that appeared found itself flanked, its shields pierced before it could orient. From the cockpit of his command vessel, Cross watched the engagement unfold, hands clasped behind his back. Let them come, he murmured. Every war needs an audience. Plasma fire streaked through the void, painting it in arcs of green and red. Human ships took hits, but returned them tenfold. An Empire destroyer erupted in flame, fragments scattering like sparks across the stars. Another turned to flee, only to be caught in a crossfire and torn apart. The Empire's endless tide suddenly looked fragile, like glass under pressure. Cross leaned toward the comm officer. Keep the feeds live. They need to see it. Every world, every station. Let them watch what happens when you threaten our own. On the deck around him, Marines and officers moved with steady precision, voices calm even in the heat of combat. Their banter carried still, light, irreverent. 2 cruisers down. Anybody bring marshmallows? Save me the big piece when that carrier cracks. It was madness and composure blended, the mask of wolves smiling even as they killed. The fleet shuddered as another Empire warship exploded, the shockwave rattling scanners. Cross's voice remained steady. Phase 2 complete. Hold formation. Make them understand. And as the last of the Empire's reinforcements broke apart in the dark, the message was written not in words, but in fire. Humanity would not be paraded, would not be broken. For the 50 ropes, for the insult carved into their pride, they had answered with steel and flame. On the surface far below, alien citizens watched the sky burn. The gallows still stood, its rope swaying, but now it was a monument to failure. Cross closed his eyes briefly, the weight of it pressing on him. Not victory, but inevitability. When he opened them again, his gaze was iron. For the 50, he repeated, softer, as if to himself. The comm crackled. Commander, sector secure. Orders. He breathed once, steady, then gave the word. Advance.